Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas. So today we are diving into one of the absolute giants of philosophy, Immanuel Kant, and his game-changing book, The Critique of Practical Reason. We're going to see how he tried to solve a massive paradox that, honestly, still messes with us today, the huge clash between a universe run by cause and effect and our own sense of human freedom. So let's just jump right into this conflict because it's something we all feel. On the one hand, science tells us we live in a universe of cause and effect, right? Every action is just a reaction in a long, predictable chain. But, on the other hand, our entire legal system, our whole idea of right and wrong, it all depends on the belief that we are free to make our own choices. So, how can both of these things be true at the same time?
And believe it or not, this isn't some new problem we just invented. Back in the 18th century, this very same paradox had created an enormous crisis in philosophy. It felt like you had to pick a side. You could either believe in a scientific world or a moral one, but not both. And this is the exact moment that Immanuel Kant steps onto the stage.
So before Kant could even begin to offer up his solution, he had to face this massive intellectual dead end head-on. He wasn't just dreaming this stuff up out of nowhere. He was responding directly to a huge, ongoing philosophical battle.
To really get what Kant did, you have to understand the stalemate he was dealing with. See, on one side, you had the rationalists. They were convinced we could figure out all the truths of the universe just by using pure logic. But on the other side, you had the empiricists, and their champion was David Hume. And Hume argued, no. The only thing we know for sure is what our senses tell us, what we see, hear, and touch.
And I gotta tell you, Hume's argument was an absolute bombshell. He basically said if all we know comes from our senses, that ideas like cause and effect aren't actually real laws of the universe. They're just habits our minds create. We see a billiard ball hit another one enough times, and we just assume a connection. This skepticism was so powerful, it didn't just put morality on shaky ground, it threatened the very foundation of science itself. Okay, so Kant's solution to this mess was, well, it was nothing short of revolutionary. He comes along and says, everybody is looking in completely the wrong place. He says, let's stop trying to find morality out there in the world, in the results of our actions or in rules from a higher power. Instead, let's look inward, at the actual structure of our own reason. And what he finds deep inside our ability to reason is something he calls the categorical imperative. Now, this isn't some ancient rulebook telling you exactly what to do. It's more like a logic check. It's a test you can run on any action to see if it's moral. So let's actually run through this test. First step, you figure out your maxim. That's just the personal rule you're acting on. So let's say your rule is, I'm going to make a promise I don't intend to keep just to get something I want. Okay. Second step, you have to universalize it. Imagine a world where absolutely everyone, by a law of nature, had to follow that rule. Well, what would happen? The whole idea of a promise would totally fall apart, right? Nobody would trust a promise ever again. And that brings us to step 3, the contradiction check. The rule, when made universal, literally self-destructs. For Kant, that logical collapse means the action is fundamentally immoral, right? So that's a pretty clever logical test, but it still leaves us with the biggest question of all. How do we have any clue that this law within is anything more than just a neat idea in our heads? How does it prove we aren't all just cogs in that giant cause and effect machine of the universe? And this, right here, is where Kant makes his most brilliant, most mind-bending move. He argues that we don't have to prove we're free before we can be moral. He flips it completely around. He says the very existence of a moral law is the thing that proves we are free. You see, Kant flips this whole problem right on its head. He says we don't start with freedom. We start with something we all experience. That little voice inside that says we ought to do the right thing even when we don't want to. And that feeling of ought is the key. Why? Because it only makes sense to say you ought to do something if you can do it. The moral law isn't going to command something that's impossible. So the very fact that we feel a moral duty is the ultimate proof that we must be free to fulfill it. Kant puts this in a really elegant way. Think of it like this. Freedom is the reason morality can even exist. It's the foundation. Without freedom, the whole idea of right and wrong is just meaningless. But the moral law, that sense of ought, is how we realize we're free. It's the reason we know it. They are two sides of the exact same coin, each one proving the other. Now for Kant, this wasn't just some clever little argument to win a debate. This discovery, finding freedom through the moral law, was the literal keystone that held his entire philosophical system together. It was the crucial bridge between the physical world of science, of cause and effect, and the inner world of human choice, reason, and morality. So, okay, why on earth does a super complex 250-year-old argument still matter so much today? Well, because it provides the intellectual bedrock for so many of the values we hold most dear. And once you see it, you start to see Kant's ideas absolutely everywhere. The concept that every single person has inherent dignity, that's pure Kant. His whole point is that because we are rational beings, able to understand and follow the moral law, we are ends in ourselves. We're not just tools or objects to be used by others. And that single idea is the foundation for our entire modern framework of universal human rights, of personal autonomy, and even international law. So Kant gives us this incredibly powerful rational foundation for morality, one that doesn't depend on what culture you're from, what you believe, or how you feel on a particular day. But it does leave us with one last really big question to chew on. In our messy, complicated, emotional world, is pure reason, by itself, really enough to guide us? This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.